Metals markets are extremely complex. You need to know the baseline stuff about those individual markets. And maybe something like nickel, I might know, or I do know more than probably the average investor out there. But I still don't invest because I think the nickel price is going to go up or the zinc price is going to go up. I buy junior mining companies because of a whole set of different reasons.
Welcome back. Today we're joined with Brian Leni. He is the publisher behind Junior Stock Review, and he's also the host of a wonderful web series called Field Notes, where he gets into the wild, puts boots on the ground, and takes you along the journey to visit various mining projects around the world. Brian, thanks for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Jeremy.
Yeah, so the junior resource space is such a interesting, unique corner of the investing world, and people always end up here through a wide variety of weird routes and avenues. And you've got a really interesting background that you've explained a little bit to me about, but can you kind of like walk us through how you discovered investing in junior mining, what drew you here, and that a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm an engineer by trade. At a school, I got into, I was first in pharmaceuticals, pharmaceutical equipment, and then I got into steel manufacturing, where I worked for about a decade. Process engineer, then was a manager in over the rolling mill process. The reason why that matters is because that transition from process engineer to manager is something that didn't end up jiving with me. And I think my own natural self, a person who's driven by personal freedom and this sort of mantra. I was always looking for something else, like some way to escape, I suppose you could say. I was introduced to a guy named Doug Casey by my brother-in-law, and he was talking about gold and silver and libertarian this and that. And it really sparked my interest because it resonated with me right away. And so I started listening to Doug and doing more research on monetary policy and kind of going down that rabbit hole. And invariably, I think most people that go down that hole invariably end up at junior mining stocks. And it's definitely at the other end of the spectrum, bullion compared to the stocks. But you get attracted, you hear the stories of the returns you can make, and that's what attracted me. So I started putting money in the market quite blindly, and learned a lot from, let's say, 2007-ish to or right up through 2011, where the so-called peak of the last market in terms of gold. Mm-hmm. And learned some, but there were still definitely more lessons to learn. But then 2013, the market was way off. 3 years from that peak. And I really wanted to leave my job. And with having an understanding wife, I said to her, you know what? I want to make a difference. I made good money. If we sold our house, we'd have a good chunk to put into the market, into the companies that I thought had the best potential to return profits. And she agreed. and so we sold the house. We took 2/3 of that equity, put it into the market, and we grabbed a rental. We had 2 kids at the time, and we were living certainly a different life from that regard. I then saw the portfolio fall by about 35% over the preceding 3 years, and I was sort of deploying that capital as the run up to 2016, and then the rest is history. 2016 hits. I did pick, and I'm not saying this is necessarily fully my ability. There's definitely some luck in there, but I hit probably a handful of the top performing junior mining companies in that blip of 6 months where the market turned. And I left that career to pursue investing full time and have been doing it since.
That's incredible. There's the saying, betting the farm, which you apparently took to heart. And yeah, you must have a very understanding wife. That's awesome. So Doug Casey has, I think, introduced so many people to this space, myself included. I think I was very young when I was blindly shouting "End the Fed" from one too many Doug Casey speeches. So having the background in engineering and then also with commodities, and then a lot of trial and error, how has that kind of engineering mindset sort of shaped your investment philosophy when it comes to looking at the opportunities?
Sure. I think at the baseline, I think an engineer at its purest sense is someone who is almost a professional learner. I don't know if that's a word actually, but
Yeah.
what they essentially teach you is how to break down problems in a certain way. And if you don't know the information, you know exactly how the problem breaks down, and you look for those ways to fill in the gaps. And I'd
Mm,
say I'm very good at it. Not only this, but I think that in my my answer to the first question, I think there's this innate drive in myself to want to be free.
mhm,
And when you're driving for something like that and you go out on your own, you're going to have failures, but you're motivated through those failures and to push as hard as you can. And I think for most people, that becomes the stumbling block, is that they're not willing to take on that risk and that fear of failure, and meet it head on. So I would say, engineering is definitely from the analytical side, but I don't think you can just be analytical. You have to have a drive in yourself, to
mhm.
want to do this sort of thing and do it professionally or on a full-time basis. And so I think for me personally, those are the aspects of myself that have allowed me to be successful.
Right. So then, and then I guess over time, how do you think your order of operations towards approaching the company is? Because like you were maybe looking at certain parameters when you were first investing and said like, okay, these things work, these things don't. How has that evolved kind of over the course of the years?
Good question. I would say over time, I've become more and more quantitative in the way that I approach investing in junior mining companies. Uh,
Hmm.
I know, again, another maybe strength of mine is that I know to an extent what I don't know and
Yep.
what I'm good at, and I stick to advanced explorers, developers. That's kind of my sweet spot in terms of where I can apply the knowledge and experience I have and put it to good use. And
Right.
when something has a resource, when something has a technical study, I can take that information. I can come up with my own valuation through DCF and a number of other things you can do quantitatively, and come up with the value for that company.
Mm,
Uh, Quantitative, I would say, is, let's say, 80-90% of it. And then the how you deal with the qualitative side is also a part of it too, and shouldn't be discounted, because in some instances it can account for much more of the end result of a company. Meaning, you can do the quantitative analysis, you can come and find a company that is undervalued and should get more recognition from the market. But because of the people running the company, because of maybe where it's located and how all those things sort of come together, you miss on the qualitative side.
mm,
So in fact, I think you need both to be ultimately as successful as possible, or repeatedly successful as possible.
right. Okay. And so you're mentioning advanced explorers, and I think we had a conversation. You were saying you're not particularly drawn to historic resources, though. You like more new discovery.
Okay, so I'll make the distinction as this. So with the advanced explorers, I basically say somebody who's got a resource or has a number of different holes where you can sort of see how this thing is shaping up, and especially if it's
Right.
more of a disseminated deposit where you're not chasing a vein that is pinching and swelling, and you need 300,000 meters of drilling to get an idea of what this thing's going to look like.
Right.
So that's one end of things. If I'm going to do grassroots exploration, I think this is what our conversation was previously. If I'm going to do grassroots, I want basically bare land, and I want it attached to a fantastic geological mind that says the reason why I staked this land is because of this.
Right.
And hopefully it's there's got a massive structure, deep tapping faults. Hopefully that it's in a jurisdiction where this management team or this individual has explored before and been successful. These sorts of things play into the grassroots exploration side of things. And if I do play that end of the spectrum, I want to do it through prospect generation, where the company is basically based, their business acumen is based around their technical ability. They form projects based off their ideas. They do some probably baseline work, try to prove their idea to a point, maybe right up to that point of drilling, and then they go to a senior mining company or another junior and try to vend it to them in a JV, let's say 75-25 or 80-20, and they hold an NSR back as sort of their intellectual property, once a certain spending limit has been met. And to me, like, I've played that other side, I guess to a degree, considering I'm not a geologist, that have a hunch, bet a bunch. I maybe fell susceptible to this in the past and lost money. And at some point, when you start losing money and your good ideas on the developer side start losing out because you're making bad choices on the high risk stuff, I think you come to the conclusion that, yeah, I can't keep on doing this. Um,
Mhm.
and so you look at the prospect generation, you find those teams that have that high geological acumen and are being successful in what they're doing. And I
Mhm.
think it's the absolute best way to get that, still get the exploration reward, but by drastically reducing your downside risk.
Right. That makes sense. So we're going to shift gears because we're going to come back to some companies here towards the end, but I kind of want to shift gears to a couple of commodities here. You've spoken a lot about nickel. It's a fascinating commodity that's really had its landscape changed over the last 4 or 5 years, with Indonesia becoming the dominant producer, producing almost 50% of the world's nickel right now, to the point where prices have deflated. BHP is shuttering operations in Australia. It's really changed the landscape. So I guess first off, like just maybe a high level your overview of where you see the nickel market, and then where's the with Indonesia, it's so prominent with the production. Where is the opportunity for the junior miner within nickel?
Sure. Yeah. And so nickel, coming from steel manufacturing, nickel has a special place in my heart and mind in
Yeah.
terms of interest. So the nickel market is quite interesting. It just as you described, Indonesia has gradually over the last 8 years increased their impact to the nickel industry. And it's been on the back of these nickel laterite deposits that are found within country. And, their influence has only increased since they've formed these relationships with these Chinese smelters that are going to be set up shop basically within their borders and bring that secondary refinement and jobs to the Indonesians instead of just taking the ore and shipping it to China and getting it processed.
Mhm.
I don't think this. What was that?
I was just going to say, I think that's a really good example of how policy can help develop the economics of a country, because simply by banning the ore export, Indonesia,
Sure.
really increased their GDP.
Yeah, absolutely. And so they've been tremendously successful. I think it also speaks to like a company like Sinshan that was so high regarded because of what they did with nickel pig iron, which is just an iron ore with a nickel credit. When Sinshan and the Indonesians were saying things, especially if you go back, let's say 4 or 5 years, the market responded. And if you look at the nickel price, how it fluctuated, it's directly in line with what Sinshan was projecting forward. And they kind of put their money where their mouth is, and that's why the Indonesian market is controlling the nickel price as we see it today. I don't think that changes. I think that they are always going to be a big part of whatever goes on in the nickel market.
Mhm.
You're going to see fluctuations along the way where, I've heard different arguments about them high grading their nickel laterite deposits and possibly you get into lower grade ore. And then obviously there's a different cost curve for that. But I think the thing to look for is what the big corporations are doing around the world. Corporations like Sumitomo, Jogmec, there's the Koreans, Panasonic. A lot of these battery centric countries are going out there, and they do have toeholds in Indonesia. Don't get me wrong, but they're making deals with juniors with deposits in good jurisdictions that are nickel sulfide deposits or awarenite deposits, which is again it's basically an iron ore deposit with a nickel credit, and that's who they're doing deals with. And what that signals to me is that, hey, look, the nickel price is going to be impacted by the Indonesians. We see that, but we're making deals for cleaner sources. And I put that in quotation marks because, it's to a degree, it's sort of up to the viewer or subjective. But that's where we're going to put our money into the future. And they've done deals across the world, Canada, Europe, Brazil. And I think
Mhm.
that's going to continue. And what's interesting about these deals is if you do some research into a lot of the nickel projects, especially the sulfides, they require probably 10 plus dollars per pound nickel for them to be economic or make sense to incentivize construction. So when you have a nickel price that's sub $8, so why are you investing in something that needs a 25% uplift in price? Well, I think that shows you that these guys are willing to pay a premium on whatever that price is to get these clean nickel credits or however you want to look at it. They want that clean offtake they want that stuff that they can say, hey, look, whether it's the Japanese government, the Canadian government, the American government, hey, we're using clean nickel sources, whether it's fully public or not, we're paying a premium for it. And you can just tell by the deals that we're invested in. And there's quite a few that you can start to look at. So to me, that's how I see the nickel market moving forward. You're going to have to be very surgical almost, and you have to be anyways in the junior mining sector. But picking companies that probably have these strategic relationships already in place, and they give you that sort of solace to a degree that, oh, there is interest from a senior miner or a senior processor in some regard. And even though the nickel price is lower and it probably has some cap, which I don't really know what it would be, but these guys are probably going to be okay. So.
Yeah. And then I guess, so just to back up briefly for the layman here, can you maybe just give a quick overview of the difference in the quality of nickel that's coming out of Indonesia versus the nickel
Sure.
sulfides?
Sure. So a nickel laterite deposit is essentially just a weathered version of the nickel sulfide. So you'll see all the laterite deposits mostly happen around the equator where there's lots of sun, rain, weathering. So these nickel sulfide deposits are exposed at surface or near surface. They get the water, they get the sun, they get all that, and it basically oxidizes the deposit. Now, the complication is in the metallurgy of these deposits, and there's a number of different elements that exist. And the reason why this is deemed dirty is because of the high pressure acid leach process, HPAL, that needs to be used to extract the nickel to be made into your various products, whether it's nickel matte or whatever. It's that part of the process. And what's really interesting is the Indonesians have had a lot more success with it than other companies around the world. And I'm blanking on the name of the company, but in Madagascar, there was a multi-billion-dollar plant that had X amount of capacity for HPAL, and it blew up. Like it literally, they had cost overruns of more than double the expected capex. They still can't reach, I think, even half of the nameplate capacity production wise. And again, it just shows you how well that Tsingshan and the Indonesians have been at executing on their side of things. So, what they say and what they do holds some weight.
Yeah. And it seems like they've really, made investments up and down the chain as well, from transportation, infrastructure, everything. And I think it's also interesting to note for the Canadian explorers that Weda Bay deposit in Indonesia was just first discovered by Canadians in the 90s, which which is it's a bit of a jog through history, but it was shortly after the Bre-X fiasco. So I can only imagine that financing an Indonesia project at the time would have been tricky. So needless to say, it took a few more years to get it online. You've also spoken about zinc, another sort of, related to steel as well. What's interesting about zinc to you?
Well, what's interesting about zinc to me is my history with zinc. And again, this kind of goes in with your other question. One of the things that I've learned in my process is to not really put too much emphasis on my ability to predict where metal prices are headed. And nickel was the first wake up call where I thought I sort of understood the market enough to say, hey, the nickel price is going to do this because of this, this, and this. And what I learned, and through mentors too, reinforced it, is that metals markets are extremely complex. Now you need to know the baselines, stuff about those individual markets, and maybe something like nickel, I might know, or I do know more than probably the average investor out there. But I still don't invest because I think the nickel price is going to go up or the zinc price is going to go up. I buy junior mining companies because of a whole set of different reasons. And the reason why is because metal price is just one reason why a junior mining company can lose your money. And until you learn that, it can be a rude awakening to the realities of where metal prices are headed, or just how little any type of commentator can really tell you about the direction of a metal consistently. They might be able to get something right today about 3 months from now, but then you ask them in 3 months where it's headed in another 3 months, and they could get it completely wrong. So that's what I learned from zinc. And the other side to it is, I think there's always opportunity in any of these metals, especially the ones like, let's say, zinc, that for the most part, it's going to really be interesting to see what happens given the trajectory of something like silver. Most of the silver in the world is mined, whether it's VMS or some sort of polymetallic deposit, and zinc and lead are derivatives or are the driver of the economics of those deposits. And so you get interesting things that happens when you have silver prices spike. Production in these polymetallic deposits can spike too, and those can have interesting effects on markets that are much smaller, like the zinc and lead market,
Right.
um, which which I think are not easy to project.
Right. Yeah, because they are, I mean, like in terms of total volume of the supply and demand needed for these some of these minerals, it's not a ton compared to, other metals out there. So what's
Yep.
interesting you most about is when it has that, you've spoken about that before, that silver credit tagged along with it in terms of increasing the economics of that project.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I like that. Well, you said like none of us have the crystal ball, but gold is doing very well right now. What's your gut telling you about this current run right now with gold?
Oh, well, I think the gold price is going higher. I think
Nice.
I think everything that's yeah, everything that's been happening in the world. By the same token, I can just tell you how wrong I've been because I've thought that since 2007, basically, and it hasn't necessarily taken a straight path there. But debt has only increased over the last 20 years. Social programs and increased debt only look like it's going to increase into the future.
Hmm.
Social unrest, whether it's US election stuff or Ukraine, Russia, or the Middle East. There's a lot of reasons, to me, anyways, that suggest that the gold price is probably headed higher.
Yeah.
Also, with what was probably the primary driver of it over the last 2 years is central bank buying, because the whether you take it from the perspective of U.S. sanctions or the diminishing appeal to the USD. Again, to me, everything points to higher precious metals prices, in particular gold. Silver's a little bit different with the industrial component, in my view.
Hmm.
But yeah, I just see higher prices for gold in the future.
I think a lot of us are in the same boat right now, and yeah, I'm very excited about the next 3 to 5 years. It's part of the
Same
reason we're going hard in this space. But
here.
you've and like you said, sometimes we can be very wrong, and you've done something interesting. You kept a journal of your trades, and
Right.
uh, and I think that that's not only just like in investing a really great idea, but in life it's a really great idea. I guess if you could like look through that mentally, what are some of the biggest lessons out of that? Uh,
Well, one of the biggest lessons, and I honestly, it took me a while to learn, was learning how to sell and making sure that I do sell.
right.
Um, I like honestly, I can't emphasize, excuse me, how important that is because most people understand the buy side. I got to buy low. I got to buy low. And then they do forget about I have to sell high. And I think what happens is that a lot of investors, myself at times in the past included, you get so wrapped up in the blue sky potential, probably also not fully understanding what you're actually invested in,
Mm,
not putting any numbers to or any quantitative side to your investment. So I'm invested in XYZ because they're worth $100 million and they're selling for 50. So if nothing has happened with the company, if nothing, no value has been added, and the company gets to 100 million, it's time to sell.
right.
And I think the tendency for a lot of people is to think past it and maybe get too wrapped up, whether it's expiration or the momentum in a market. And unfortunately, you ride that roller coaster up and then you come right back down. And usually you decide to sell somewhere near the bottom,
Right.
which is, you've given up. And that's prototypical of bear markets, right? Everybody gives up and they blow out their stock. And that's sort of where you are today.
Mhm.
And you project the past into the future.
Yeah. So it sounds like you have the opposite problem of a lot of people who get shaken out too early, holding too long.
Well,
That's what's
well, yeah, and I tend it depends what you mean by shaking out too early because to me, if you lock in profits, you may not understand what you're invested in, but if you locked in profits and you walked away, man, you're in such a probably small minority in the junior mining sector that bravo, like I could only clap because I would much rather be way too early on my sells on everything and make money than to be probably how most investors are in this sector, which is sort of a crapshoot. They're all over the place.
Mhm.
And so I think for most guys, whether it's not selling or selling too early, it's probably a marker of you don't know what you actually own.
Yeah.
And you can take that a number of different ways. But I would much rather be on the sell too early side than the sell too late.
Yeah.
And that's again the journaling and stuff like that has definitely helped me in those end of year looks at my P&L and see where things went wrong. And
Yes.
it's always my fault. Whatever those losses were, I can attribute to things that I've done wrong. It's nothing to do with markets or nothing to do with management teams. It's all on me.
Well, that's important because I mean, short-term memory can be deadly, right? And we
Yeah.
can fall into the same traps over and over. And like you're saying, these things can be so complicated to invest in terms of how many different facets and components go into them. And as you reference, like metals price is just one, jurisdiction and region is another one. In 2021, you were talking about you were really excited about the Red Lake district. We've definitely seen some high quality companies come out of that in the last few years. Where are you looking jurisdictionally right now?
I think it depends on perspective. I think for M&A, I'm very attracted to Finland's central Lapland belt. I own shares in Orion Resources. The interesting thing about that particular company in that area is the JV between Orion and B2 Gold, which is the Helmi project, is coincident with Rupert Resources' Ikari discovery and Ikari project, which is, I would say, if it's not a 1A, it's probably a 1B
Mhm.
deposit in terms of ounces and grade for an open pit. The interesting part about it is I'm of the view that Rupert needs to consolidate Helmi to make their pit optimized, where you could put that thing into operation, but you're not going to be able to optimize the economics of it if you own the Helmi ground from a pit layout standpoint and just a mining operation standpoint. So I think it needs to be consolidated. And for those that don't know, Rupert sort of showed their cards. They did a deal with B2 for B2 70%. It was $100 million. But the ROFR and the remaining 30% are held with Orion. And that's a big trump card to hold. And I think, considering all the things that have happened, I think that you're going to see a deal between Rupert and Orion. Given the new CEO that stepped in with Rupert, I guess I shouldn't say he's former La Mancha. He is La Mancha, and he'll be taking over as CEO of Rupert. And I think he's a deal maker, and he's gonna put Rupert in the best position for its investors. And to me, that includes buying Orion. So from an M&A perspective, I think that's highly perspective, and I'm invested accordingly. From an exploration front, we're talking about prospect generation. One company that definitely stands out is Canadian Minerals.
Hmm.
Got 20 million in cash. They've got an excellent technical team that's led by CEO Zach Flood. I think $20 million in the hands of a team like this that are there to generate ideas and JV them to the top senior companies in the mining industry is the recipe for success. They've already discovered Renault, which was discovered undercover. That's what these guys specialize in, is finding gold deposits undercover. And they put their money where their mouth is. And there's a number of projects within their portfolio that I think show great promise. And that's one of those exploration companies where you get the upside risk, but I think your downside is minimized greatly. And yeah, so those are two interesting areas. And Kenorland's mostly focused on Canada and Alaska.
Right. Yeah. And they had one project that was, I think we'd spoken about the South Uchi project, which is in the Red Lake area.
Yeah.
And it's like when we talk about grassroots, that's sort of a grassroots
Oh,
play.
totally.
And that, I think it's sort of because it's till sampling is what was interesting about it, right? So maybe just like
Yeah.
kind of explain to investors that, what
Sure.
piqued your interest on a project like that.
Sure. So Kenorland's way of doing things fits exactly how I see exploration too. They do huge plots of land. So South Uchi, they stake 65,000 hectares. And I don't know if the project's still that big, but that's the original. Then they were
Mhm.
able to convince Barrick to go in and spend, I think it was $3 or $3.5 million on a regional scale till sampling program.
Mhm.
The area where South Uchi is, it's on a major fault structure, but it's all that area has been glaciated, meaning this glacial till or overburden has formed over the bedrock, and so there's nothing outcropping at surface, and so you have to be testing that glacial till for signs that that glacier has scraped the top of the rock, hopefully hit an exposed vein or exposed a piece of rock with gold in it, and is sitting in that glacial till. So these guys set up a grid across the 65,000 hectares, and they're very widely spaced because this is regional, and then they try to find golden till anomalies, whatever comes up. What was interesting is the first pass came up with a lithium and a nickel target, and
Hmm.
Barrick dropped the project altogether. Then what happened is, Kenorland was able to take one of their other positions. They had sold a position or option a position to Lyft, which is a lithium exploration company. They were able to translate that share position into $20 million in cash. They then took a portion of that cash, put it into South Uchi, and did a more refined or localized golden till phase of till exploration, and they came up with this banger of a golden till target that now they've got packaged, ready to drill, and that's news flow that I think we should see, let's say, the next 2, 3, 4 months with a senior mining company, and I think it'll be the best deal that they've done so far.
Well, yeah, I took a look at the project and it is very interesting.
Yeah.
So Brian, thank you so much. We've covered a lot of ground from personal history to commodities to some more specifics about these junior companies. Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'd encourage everybody you've got a lot of stuff online. I'd really encourage everybody to go check it out because you're a wealth of knowledge and information. So thank you for sharing a bit of it with us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeremy.
All right, and we'll have to do it again soon.